What are we talking about today, Ben?
Well, AI.
Yeah.
And I think when we try to unpack a topic like AI, it's something that either invokes kind of a lot of emotions, right? We'd be like, oh my goodness.
Just depends on who introduced you to AI. Was it a conspiracy theorist or was it a business person or a tool? Or, I think
this speaks to really when we don't understand topics, we have emotional reactions to them. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes we're going to feel apprehensive about something we don't understand, dismissive of something we don't understand. It just depends on how you really process things that you just don't get, where you're just like, oh, that's rubbish. That's just complete nonsense. Yeah. Or it's just like distrustful. Mm-hmm. So I think it invokes a lot of emotion when we talk about AI. Yeah. So today we're going to unpack it. I'm a software engineer, so I understand something about computers and how they operate. And so we can kind of take an angle that's kind of somewhat technical, but at the same time, practically speaking, the goal is also having the construction experience. As a company, as a software company, we use AI in ways that might surprise you. And so we're going to try to unpack the topic a little bit. So first,
what is it? Yeah. What the heck is AI? A two-letter word.
So glad apparently. You asked. Yeah. Well, artificial intelligence is what it stands for. And I think that's where where the conspiracy theories start beginning, right? Because artificial intelligence, it's not real intelligence. And I think what we're trying to convey,
movies from like 30 years ago or whatever come to mind.
Yes.
I don't know how long ago iRobot was a thing, but that's the movie that always comes to mind for me whenever people talk about AI.
Artificial meaning that it's not a person, it's not the intelligence of a human being, and AI is essentially compiling all of this information from publicly available sources. And sometimes depending on which AI model, it can use even private sources for information that people have said, okay, this is the model that we're going to train a computer on of understanding information. And computers are amazing at analyzing things when it's using, data and processing all that stuff. I mean, we have very limited capacity to process data, but it's more or less using it like a human. When we say artificial intelligence, AI is saying, or the concept is, read it like a human would. Take all of the available information, read it like a human would understand it, and present options to a user based off of their prompts. In summary. So I'm trying to simplify something rather complex.
Yeah. And essentially it's searching the web, right? It's searching just available data that available on Google, anyone, right? Yep. I mean, websites, things like that. And then it's aggregating.
Think of an intern that just read the entire internet and could just report on anything you wanted it to, but not necessarily having the context of you or your business or anything else. And so therefore we can get AI answers that seem amazingly precise and detailed depending on the context, or wildly like off the rails.
Yeah. Well, if you think about that, I'm like, you can't believe everything you hear on the internet either, right? Or blog articles or things. I'm like, not all the data that even AI is being fed is factual. Right.
And I think they're trying to train these models to use trusted data sources, not just every single blog post out there or something like that. They're trying to establish credibility for data sources.
Right.
But that's where things can go wrong, because something can be assumed to be credible and might not be, or a difference of perspective.
Good point.
So we're trying to unpack something rather technical, but trying to break down, practically speaking, what we can do with it, how we can actually use it.
Yeah, an analogy we were kind of talking about is AI is like a room full of smart strangers offering you advice. You still have to decide what to listen to, though. I was like, that's pretty good.
Yep.
I'm like, going into a room of people you've never met before, you don't know what they know, and then asking for just random advice. Yeah. Right.
More practically speaking, if we talk about maybe opening the Pandora's box of AI, if you're new to this concept or have never used AI before, the practical introduction to it could be something like ChatGPT as an app that you would install on your phone or use in your browser on your computer. And essentially what's called a prompt is you're instructing the AI in something like, give me the best restaurants in Springfield, Missouri.
Similar to searching on Google or Bing or, a search engine.
AI is a lot more opinionated because instead of like Google, it's saying, well, this is all the things I found. And now they are introducing more AI results in search too. But it's more or less saying, take that information, process it the way a human would, and give me a recommendation. So it can be like, hey, I'm feeling like Chinese today, recommend a good restaurant.
Yeah. And
so it can look at reviews, it can look at ratings and say, hey, there's the top 3 restaurants in Springfield. So it's going to give you more of an opinionated response.
Yeah.
And when we translate that over to something outside of like restaurants, and we're saying in, say, construction specifically, we could look at things like, I need to understand a topic, and using all the available information help me understand something that we maybe don't have context for before. So introduction to it would be something like Chat GPT, install as an app, start prompting it. But then that's where we start needing to dig into more of the details. And if you're new to it, your first introduction might be like, this is rubbish, or how do I leverage that tool like that? It's so broad, it knows everything. You can have wrong perspective either direction with what this is.
Yeah, but I think kind of our perspective on this conversation is AI really can be like a superpower for your construction business, right? I mean, like it can be a super tool, right?
Yep.
Similar to a drill or something like that. And like you can use it you can leverage it to do things faster, do things more efficiently, things like that. But I do think that there are some precautions or things to just be aware of before you actually leverage the tool so that it's not just getting it wrong the whole time.
I think you really touched on it right from an introductory standpoint. It's a tool, not a person.
A replacement.
Yeah. And so when we look at a tool, I mean, my brother's a trim carpenter, loves his Festool products, and he's just like, this saw or whatever it is, it doesn't replace the operator.
Right.
And I think there's this sort of conspiracy theory type mindset of like AI is replacing people. Well, we haven't seen that to be true at all. Yeah. And I think it's more or less, it needs to understand, if you use a tool, you still need an operator. Now that can make that operator so much more efficient,
way more
right?
Efficient, yeah.
He can get 10 times more done because he's using that specific tool. Let's look at pounding nails with a hammer versus using a pneumatic nailer. Game changer. Yeah. You watch somebody very skilled with a nailer, 10 nails in 1 second versus, you could never pound nails that fast.
Right.
And I think that's this tool.
Yep.
But we need to look at it from that standpoint of like, you're an operator using a tool. And also, I mean, we'll kind of unpack more of that later, but I think we need to have the right mentality when thinking about AI.
Absolutely.
It needs to be a tool.
Yep. And I think kind of one of the first big cautions that we just defined in some of our prep is AI is not an expert. It makes me think of, obviously we have a construction estimating software, and we build data for contractors to be able to estimate things faster, right? Like how to install decking or how to install flooring or painting and priming, you know what I mean? Things like that, like line items of tasks people are going to do on jobs. And it was funny, I was like, oh, I can totally build out some data for contractors to just use everywhere with AI, of course. But I have no expertise when it comes to like how to actually install lap siding, for example. I think that was the assembly or the data I was trying to build out using AI as a tool. And so I'm like, AI is defining out, here's the materials you need, and here's the labor that you need, and I'm like, oh, that looks pretty right, but I have no expertise in what actually goes into installing lap siding, for example, or like that you do need corners, or hey, what about windows and doors, or, like just so many things that I have zero experience in and expertise in, and that I think are like, but if you're someone who's like trying to use AI and you have no experience, like in my case, trying to figure out how much is it actually going to cost to install lap siding, it can look so right, but it's actually so wrong. I think I brought you the assembly. I was like, hey, I did it. Here you go. And you're like, well, what about this? And what about this? And it's got that wrong, And so I think just the fundamental understanding of AI is not the expert, and you have to have the expertise, and you have to actually know what the end goal is to make it efficient and effective.
And let's think of it that way as well. Whereas if we have that perspective as well, if it's not a magical tool, it's not it's not magic.
Right.
It's not like, tell me everything I want to know in one sentence and give me my life back. And, it's not going to do things like that.
Right.
In sense, you're telling it, essentially what you're trying to tell AI to do is tell me how to install lap siding, all the various different types of products that could potentially use in lap siding, whether it's hardy board or some sort of LP smart side or some other cedar siding, like there's the install method variations, the flashing methods, and all of the things involved. What's the sheeting behind it? All of the things, the variations that you don't have context of because you haven't done it before.
I've never actually installed siding. Right.
And so in that type of context, if you used AI of something, we were playing around with this earlier in prep for the podcast, of taking a topic like, if this had been the first time doing something. And I had actually pulled together a chat here just as an example. And this was, if you've never built a deck before, and you're a contractor with experience as a, say, trim carpentry or framing carpenter, like you understand building methods. You understand how to cut boards. So you have general understanding of something, but you might not understand a nuance of a particular application of a skill, like building a deck.
Right.
The prompt was, this is my first time building a residential deck on a new home. I'm a contractor with a lot of skills as a carpenter. I'd like to understand better the process flow of deck building so I can quote a job. And so the prompt is starting from a foundational level. Let's get facts first and then talk about details more or less later. And so the response back is I'm saying, okay, the deck building process for a new home was the initial planning and site assessment, door thresholds, grading, drainage, setbacks, code requirements, and a lot more detail here. And so it's providing some more context. And then the response was initial planning and site assessment was section 1. And then section 2 was the estimating quoting piece of like breaking this down into assemblies. There's footings, there's posts and beams, joists and ledgers, decking, stairs, railings, trim, and skirting. So if you hadn't done something before, or this is not something you do every day, this can be an incredibly useful tool to give you the context of saying, I mean, nobody has the memory to remember every single thing they've learned, even if they built one deck or two decks. This is a helpful way of reintroducing yourself to a topic or digging deeper into something, or a specific application or more detail related to something. And then from there, it's
scope, right? I mean,
scoping it,
scope,
right? And then from there, we can nail it down. Permitting, layouts, footings, the framing piece, the decking, the railings and trim all were sections we expanded out further. But to your point earlier, Kenzie, what's the goal here? And in this case, it's I want to dig more deeply into methods. And you can't build assemblies or specifications for the specific thing without a general understanding of it.
Right.
And that way, we're all on the same page. Another practical application of this, which was something that came out of a conversation we had with one of our contractors actually earlier, was he had this billing situation where he needed clarity around, he had a problem. I started playing around with just solutions to the problem. And it was, more or less saying, hey, this is the issue, go create a solution for it. And AI was really failing. And so we did a reset and it was like, okay, let's start with just understanding the problem first. And some of the prompts were, let's start over completely was one of the prompts because it was just going down the wrong path. AI is one of these things that as humans, if we're working together on a project and I had a piece of this work and you had looked at it and said, that's just your thought was, it's completely wrong. You wouldn't necessarily tell me that's just all wrong. It's just hard for humans to tell each other that.
Because you care about care about people, and
and the first thought is like, wow, he put a lot of work into that, but I still feel it's wrong. And you're trying to understand where I was coming from with perspective, and
what was the miss? Like, where'd you miss along the way? Things like that.
Or yesterday, you had asked me a question of which one of these design concepts do you prefer, and I'm thinking to myself, well, obviously you have an opinion here, and you've also worked on creating these several concepts for a reason. And so my thought wasn't just like, yeah, I like that one better than the other ones. I'm just thinking, well, that one appeals to me, but I also understand where you're coming from.
What do you think?
So human interaction is different than AI interaction.
Totally.
Because with AI, it doesn't have emotion. It doesn't have feelings. You can say, I feel that's wrong, start over again, try a different way all day long. And it does not care. So you have to get yourself into that mindset of patience, and you're not going to get it right the first time necessarily.
Well, I think you highlighted something just even in your prompt. You're like, hey, we need to actually understand what the problem is. And so like kind of one of the things we talked about is like, are you and AI on the same page, right? Like it's the same starting point, kind of like what you're talking about of like, hey, on a project, like were we in sync? Did we know, the end goal? Did we know the problem? Did we know? I think that's the idea behind like when you're actually using an AI tool is like, is it fuzzy to you? And if it's fuzzy to you, then it's going to, the result is not going to be, what you're looking for.
One of the prompts here I had used was, I need to understand the problem and start with that perspective. And then the summary was, here's the situation, here's the key problems. And then this is why this matters for you. And it was very detailed and very close to being right. And then from there, I was like, well, I need to understand something. What's different about this situation versus something similar to it? And then it's like, yeah, this is, good point. Then from there it was, now let's go back to the problem. Here's points of clarity. And then from there we end up having a very well-defined, these are the pain points. We got the AI and myself were on the same page as far as what the problems were. and from there we can sort of develop a solution. But if you jump to a solution too fast and the problem's not understood, then AI is suggesting a solution to a problem that's not in alignment with what the real problem is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what you're kind of highlighting is AI can kind of help you understand some perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It can help you understand some, by understanding the problem, it can help you understand solutions, of course. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the piece that's difficult to nail down on the first time you're using AI, or like trying to explore if AI is helpful for your business,
Mm-hmm.
is how to even prompt it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I think that's a skill in itself of like, how am I understanding what you have to feed the engine, if you will, to give you the result that you're actually looking for, I think is something that just takes some time and some learning.
Think back of the time you used a tool the first time. That didn't go as smoothly as, say, 100 or 200 times into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no different. You have to think of it as a tool that you're going to learn to master. And it's one of the tools that can seem deceptively easy to operate, because you can put any type of prompt in there and you're going to get a response back instantly.
That's opinionated.
That feels close.
Yeah.
Or we've had, I remember how many times we put something in that we're thinking as a matter of analysis, or as a matter of like, here's a general framework for something, flush that out in more detail.
Yep.
And get a response back and say, wow, that feels good. But then when you interrogate it, you feel like, oh, actually there's missing pieces there.
Yeah.
One of my biggest frustrations with AI is it doesn't sound like me. You know this because I love to write. I love to create content, and then I get something back. And that was one of my early frustrations with AI. Because
I love it because I hate writing content, and I'm like, oh, you made me sound so smart. It's so great.
I got over that frustration by realizing this is a tool that's going to mirror my personality and the way I communicate the more I invest into it.
Because it's going to learn from it.
It's going to learn, and it's not replacing me or the way I think or the way I'm trying to communicate. It's a tool. Mm-hmm. It's something that can now take my personality and the way I want something to sound. And you can, guys, you can create some very. It's a shortcut to great results.
Yeah.
You can create some things that are really, really cool very quickly.
Yeah.
When you have the right prompts.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned something just a minute ago. You said interrogate the AI.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that look like? I mean, just, you don't have to go through a specific example of a chat for that, but like, how is it that you're interrogating it? What does that even mean?
You had mentioned earlier, you want to know what the destination looks like. What's the output you're trying to get? And I think that's an important piece of this, because if you have clarity around, we're writing a specification for our deck project that we started off with earlier. And we started with this general, like, well, what is it that we're, general concepts, like, what are we building? How are we building it? Help me understand building processes. But then when we narrow it down, and you can ask questions of like, well, what's a typical deck footing, look like? How deep should it be? And we're not going to say, well, depending on regions, that could be 3 foot. It needs to be below the frost line. You're gaining an education very quickly by just asking questions, just like you would a master deck builder potentially, that you're just saying, in natural human terms of like, well, is there any reason why I shouldn't dig my deck footings deeper than the frost line, just to be safe? If it's a 36-inch frost line and I go 4 feet, and they'd say, and the response would be something like, there's no harm in doing that. You're paying extra for concrete, but that might be, good thinking to be safer rather than, cheating on the depth. There's something along those lines, or different soil conditions, or it could bring more detail to something that you don't have a lot of context around very quickly. So it can help you level up as a builder much faster. Yeah. But to your point, I veered off.
No, that's great. That's good.
Interrogating. Yeah. As a part of that process, gain context so you can interrogate. And one of the areas where we found a lot of success is when you understand the problem yourself, and then you get results back, you can refine it by saying, well, make it shorter. Get rid of the bullet points. I need one sentence. I need one paragraph. It needs to feel this way.
Right? Yeah.
Make it funny.
Yeah.
There's lots of things you can do that have really cool results, or give me 6 different ways of looking at the same problem, or give me 2 different ways of looking at the same problem. The AI does not care how much work it has to do.
Right. Yeah. It goes back to what you were saying of like, if we were working on a project together, I submitted something that was completely off. I think that's the point of like, you're not going to berate me and say like, you did a terrible job, you're fired, whatever it is, because you missed the mark or whatever. But with AI, it's not a human. There's no emotion. You're not going to offend it, So I think being patient with it and actually spending the time and just it's fine if you're like, no, rewrite that. That's completely wrong. You missed this, this, and this. And it can be that simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to be like, oh, you're so right. It's going to affirm you.
Good
to where you
catch.
feel so smart all the time.
So smart, yes. Yeah.
Hopefully you have the expertise to actually back it up. But I think that's the piece of, what you're talking about of interrogating that's important, of like, hey, continue refining it, continue asking it to tweak the result until you get to, a point to where you're like, yeah, that's good. That's passing. That's ready to share or use or, whatever that may be.
If you're listening to this podcast and you feel like this is somewhat overwhelming or a lot of information, you can start very simply with this and sort of self-guided learning. Like it does not have to be complicated. And also it doesn't have to be a tool you use. I think it's like you can pound nails by hand if you'd like to do it that way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
And so I think if you're a high efficiency, a high output person and you want to accelerate results, AI can be a tool in the toolbox, just like a tool in the shop or a tool you're bringing out to the field that helps you be more productive. It's not something you have to use.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
I think it's also something you don't have to use everywhere. Mm-hmm. There are some things, like the other day I was creating a chart. I could make a much better chart than I could use my AI tool to create for me because I understand charting, and it was just easier for me to create the right results.
Yep.
But if that's something that's complicated or something you don't like doing, use an AI tool for it. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Totally. It doesn't have to be for everything. It doesn't replace you at all. It doesn't devalue you at all. Absolutely. It's just something to make you more efficient. Just like using a track saw doesn't make you less of a carpenter because means you can't cut a straight line with a saw without a track.
Right.
It just makes it faster,
right,
and more efficient and more precise.
That's the whole point.
And so I think it's just something that as a tool, it's not something to be afraid of. It's something that's a tool.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we realize when we talk to a lot of contractors, right? And small business owners particularly are wearing 15 hats. And so I think that's kind of the purpose of why we're even talking about this topic in general, is like, how can we help save you some time, and give you a resource potentially that can help you be more efficient. And it's just a process of growing. It's a process of learning. And I think that kind of leads into, we mentioned patience, right? And I think that's what you're speaking to as well, of like, you have to guide it. It's a conversation, right? It's not a vending machine, it's good. You have to like continue refining it back to that interrogation step that we were just talking about in terms of caution. But what about practically speaking? So we spent a little bit of time because, I hate it when people just talk about like theory of like, oh, that's so great, but like, how do I actually use it in my business? And so what would you say from an AI perspective could help a construction business owner to, use this tool and run a more efficient business? What are some practical ways that they could use it?
I think one of the things that we're great at as business owners oftentimes is having a general framework for something, but not having the time to deep think it. And so what I mean by that is what I used to do before the era of AI was I'd have a specific problem. I'd think of it from all kinds of different angles. I'd spend time, days, sometimes thinking about it.
Sleepless nights, whatever it is, right?
Good one.
Yeah.
Let's say there's an employee that's been inefficient, dragging the team down, and you're thinking, I got to do something about that. I could have a conversation with them about that or her about that. I like them. But what you have is a general framework for the problem. Like, okay, this is a person that I would like to be a part of the team, but here's some of the problems I'm having with them. Here's some of the thoughts that I'm having on solutions. What you can do is create a prompt. So this is just a general kind of prompt of like, I'm having a low performing employee. I really like them. They have great personality. Here's all the things going for them. Here's the negatives. Let's problem solve. And so what you're going to get back from that is maybe a little more clarity around the problem even. And then you're taking the wealth of information from people that are HR experts.
True.
You're taking the wealth of information from everybody on the internet that's weighed in on things like that as ways of mentoring people and challenging people, or even when to fire somebody. And you're putting that all, aggregating that. So you're telling your intern as your AI, go get me all that expert information, bring it back to me, and let me process it.
Report on it.
Yeah. And so instead of being an island as a business owner where you're having to deep think all this stuff yourself, which is what I used to do and feel like very overwhelmed by that.
It takes a lot of time.
It does.
Yeah. You're
sending your assistant off, telling your AI, go bring me back the information from the experts and let me weigh some of that stuff. And some of it, you might look at one approach and say, I don't like that at all. That's not a great way. I like this person. I don't want to berate them. I don't want to write them up.
Yeah.
And you're saying, give me another angle on this.
Yeah. and maybe give me the employee's perspective, or like, here's some things that the business has been going through, or, I don't know, you can kind of like guide it in that way too, to where it can tee up a conversation with that employee to be effective and show more leadership, right?
Yeah. One of the things we do often with AI prompts is make assumptions that the AI understands more context than it does. And so if you get a response back that says, yeah, for this particular situation, and you're like, actually, this person's my office manager, and she's been with me for 5 years and been extremely loyal through thick and thin. Now you're providing more context.
That's good.
And I think that's the thing that sometimes is missed, because AI doesn't say, oh, give me more information. It's just going to say, based on what you told me, I understand everything.
Yeah. I think the other thing I love about the example you just gave is it's documented, right? Like, a lot of people don't like typing, especially in this space, right? And so I think it's important, like, even from an HR's perspective, like, if you're having a hard conversation with an employee or things like that, I know we're kind of veering off into more business practice stuff, but it's documented, it's written out, and you can refine it, you can edit it, you don't have to share all of it, but it does give you a piece of content that could just be shared via email. Hey, we talked about this earlier today, just wanted to send it to make sure we were on the same page, and that's what you heard too. Those kinds of things. You don't have to type it. It's easier to recap. I think those are meaningful, just pieces of tools of, like, writing content is hard, and nobody wants to spend the time, typing.
A huge note of caution here. If that does not sound like you, or if that's not what you try to communicate, don't run with it.
Right.
Refine it. Good. This is back to the patience thing we talked about. If you're taking what you assume to be a summary of a conversation, putting it into a chat bot, and it comes back and says, hey, here's what I heard, and you look at that and say, that's not really what happened, you're not done yet.
Absolutely.
So iterate to perfection. Yep. Don't take a shortcut and say, yeah, it's close enough. It's not close enough. Get it right.
Good point.
And that doesn't take much more work. Shortcut. Let's talk about voice to text, because this can be a conversation to get it right, where this is essentially the chat bot is replacing you having to type everything.
True.
We're saying, hey, these are general thoughts, summarize all of this. You get a response back and you say, okay, now actually add another detail that I forgot about. And so it's iterative towards something you're saying, now that's right.
Yeah. And you can do that with chat. Yeah. You can do that with ChatGPT too.
Yeah.
That tool we were talking about is just click a button on your phone or on laptop, whatever it is that you're using, and you can voice to text that too.
Yep.
A lot of people are used to that.
Yeah. So the general guidance, and then work iteratively. And I think that's also how we logically process things as humans too. Like, it's hard to load up in our memory the entire context of everything around something. We think of things like little bits of, like, oh yeah, there's actually that piece that I forgot about. Yeah. And then when you read the response, you're like, well, actually, that's really kind of seems unfair. That seems harsh, as in this employee review situation. Right. You're like, boy, or that's not direct enough. Those are emotions or feelings we can have to direct something to make it better.
True. So true. I like it. I think, so practically speaking, if you're needing to have like a hard conversation with an employee, or
customer,
a subcontractor, vendor, anyone really, it can just kind of help you process and put words on paper for maybe what some of the things you're feeling.
And the documentation piece you bring up is key, because now that's, even if it doesn't go anywhere, just documenting a conversation of, like, today, Kinsey and I talked about this, and here's a general summary of things, and then write that up into more detail, save it as a note, and you're done with that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's the ramblings that you can now refine into something that are more specific, and refine them over multiple prompts.
So good.
Yeah.
Okay. What about estimate specs?
Okay.
Right? Like,
I love
scope.
This one.
We care a lot about this, obviously, because we have estimating software, and we want people to estimate accurately and transparently, in the sense of, like, everybody's on the same page. That way there's clarity if you have to change order and things like that, right? We care about transparency, and we also care about contractors knowing what things cost. So with that, you have to actually share specifications, like, to some extent. I'm not saying like every board, you don't have to on a job, but how do you utilize ChatGPT to write estimate specs?
I think that's one of the things that we've put a lot of muscle into as a company that's building estimating software, because we realize one of the weaknesses of any type of AI model is what data it's been trained on. And so, kind of a sneak peek on that side, we've been working very hard on a product that uses a very extensive data library of very accurate information to get more direct here, give you quicker results that are probably more accurate than you're going to get out of most standard chat bots. But what you have today in just a ChatGPT prompt is the ability to type something like, let's start with something like back to our deck example, and we want to build a specific line item description for something like installing the decking. The kind of maybe the starting place for a lot of people would be to say, like, I'm installing a deck, write a customer facing description. And from that, we're going to get back a just very generic response that's, we build high quality custom decks designed for everyday living, long-term durability, and our process includes, and you're like, whoa, we went off the rails right at the beginning.
No real specifics in that.
Yeah.
Sales language.
Yeah, no, it sounds beautiful, but it's lacking all specifics whatsoever.
Yeah.
So then we go back and we put a new prompt in here in this thread, meaning this sort of conversation. And it's, let's break down the project into line item specifications, and then this is a conversation. So I'm saying what you provided was more of a summary of the whole project. And so it's like, absolutely, here's a breakdown. Site preparation, footings and foundation, structural framing, so on and so forth. And then from there, I'm saying, okay, now this is everything for the whole project. I want a specific line item. So my prompt is, let's work on a specification for one item that we can reuse for future jobs. And so we prepared this prompt for the show as an example of what you could do. So in this case, we're saying install treated 5-quarter decking. Now we're down to some more specifics. Now there could be also things, if you're a deck builder, you're thinking, well, this is blind facet, is this surface nailed, or surface screwed. There could be other aspects to that, but chat makes assumptions.
Yeah. Well, and if that is the case, and you're like, oh, I want to be super specific on that, you could just bullet it out too. Like, here are the things that I want included in that spec.
Yeah, include what you want done.
And it's going to be blind fastened or whatever it is.
Good. So from there, we have a scope: install pressure treated 5-quarter decking boards over prepared framing. Includes laying out the deck. Well, actually, this one includes a confirmed joist spacing, meets code and material requirements, typically 16 inch on center, which would be important if you were just coming in installing decking over somebody else's deck. But I added another prompt in here. But this is a deck we already built, so the verifying the framing shouldn't be a part of it. That's a different assembly.
Yeah, interrogating it.
There you go. Right, and then from there we have an assembly that's pretty close, where it's saying install pressure treated 5-quarter decking boards over existing code compliant framing. And then installing the decking boards, consistent spacing, drainage expansion, fasten using corrosion resistant screws. I mean, you're looking like an expert where you're providing lots of details. The type of fasteners, the building methods, the trimmers around it, the blocking requirement, all of these things that might go into doing that. That would just be so much work to try to build yourself. Yeah. I mean, you just wouldn't want to think about that. And not only that, but that's one assembly out of 50 that you need for a deck.
Yeah. I think from a customer's perspective too, like if you have to think about it, if you're bidding a deck for someone, they're probably getting a couple bids, right? 2 to 3. And if you're providing that level of detail and you can get to that in just a couple minutes with some, AI support, you're gonna set yourself apart from the competition for sure.
So from there, it included some exclusions, and I'm saying let's remove exclusions because that's on a project level, not a line item level. And so we perfected this over time and got to a specification we were happy with. And from there we can use things like make it shorter, make it one paragraph, make it make it more cohesive, make it sound a certain way.
The parameters around that.
Yeah. Yes. And so, you can arrive at a result that you feel like that describes what we're doing really well. It comes from my perspective as the expert in this particular topic. And it doesn't, and I think that's the area where you have to almost, if you're somebody that's very precise, wants to be doing things right, you almost feel like this is a shortcut that kind of hurts your pride a little bit almost. And I felt that a little bit too, because I'm like, this is a bot that's telling me how to do my job. I'm the expert. You're not. This is a computer. This is
like, you're right.
Yeah. But it's like, that's true.
Yeah.
All this thing is doing is taking your knowledge and expertise and everyone else's knowledge and expertise, aggregating it, creating something that you can be proud of. Yeah. And so it's your work, and you're using a tool to make it better. Nobody's saying, aha, you cheated. You used a saw. Yeah. I saw what you did. It feels that way somewhat, and I think that's something we just have to swallow somewhat and be like, is there anything wrong with reading a book on how to build decks and being better at that? Nope. Well, what about a shortcut to reading all of the books on decking in
Cliff
one
Notes
go?
version, right?
Right, exactly. The Kinsey version.
I like that.
Yes.
I like reading the first 2 chapters of books. I'm like, I got pretty much everything.
Yeah. I've read multiple books where you get into about chapter 12 and you're like, no, what's the point of this book anymore? We got it. It was chapter 3. It was about all we needed to know.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, I like it. So we talked about performance reviews. We talked about parameters. So, make it 2 sentences long, some of those kinds of things is what we mean by that. Style,
Yep.
make it funny. We talked about that a little bit too, of just educating the bot. How do you want to sound? What's your voice? What's the tone? Do you want to be clear, confident, non-salesy, or do you want to be salesy? Like what's the voice? So I think that's a big piece to getting AI to sound more like you, and that just takes time and refinement. Talked about prepping for hard conversations. I think kind of just in recap of that section, it can be so hard to like actually put on paper how you feel about a situation.
Yep.
In a way that's like you can communicate, right? And I think that's the benefit with that AI can bring with like having hard conversations, is like even understanding your perspectives of it, seeing another person's perspectives of it, and then sharing something, being able to share something, maybe not all of it, but some of the detail, just so that it's documented, right? What can't you do with AI?
Interesting. I think this comes down to, when you look at it as a tool, don't jump to a conclusion too fast with AI, because I think one of the things it can be particularly poor at is because AI is usually not, no, that's wrong. Usually it's going to tell you.
Very agreeable.
Yeah, very agreeable. It's going to usually kind of go with whatever vein of thought or train of thought you had, or, vein of, this line of questioning, more or less, right? I had to use vein. Just couldn't come up with something to fit. Anyway, there's this aspect of kind of over-reliance on AI to do some things that maybe you're just not enough of an expert to do. Sometimes you need accountants, sometimes you need lawyers, sometimes you need a friend to kind of challenge your thoughts on something, and then you can kind of go to an AI model and say, that's a different perspective. I think one of the other things about it is AI doesn't have emotional intelligence necessarily. I mean, maybe better than some humans sometimes, but it's not emotional. It's not human. Yeah. And I think to be human is to be flawed, and to be human is to have like weaknesses, and I think that's one of the aspects of AI being perfect, in the sense of like perfect symmetry and spelling and all of these things. I mean, there might be exceptions to that. Yeah. But for the most part, AI is going to create this like very highly consistent, highly educated response that might not be your brand at all.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing when it comes down to the cores of who you are as a person and how you communicate. You need to maintain you.
Yes.
You need to not let the tool replace you. You need to keep it in the toolbox as that, and retain your personality, and let AI help you level up as a person, help you understand more. It's like, aggregating books and thoughts and helping you understand things you hadn't thought of before. Use it as a tool. Yeah. But I think that's the piece that is probably one of the maybe wrong assumptions, is it can kind of arrive at sort of being something that replaces who we are.
Yeah. I like what you said about it, of like it's an intern or it's an assistant. Kind of think of it that way, of like, hey, go find me this thing. Right? Yeah. Like I think that's a really good, like the assistant can't run the company. They can't build an estimate. They can't write a legal document. They can't, there's a lot of things that an assistant or an intern cannot do because they don't have the expertise or experience, right? So I think if you can think of AI as like, hey, how can I utilize this to be an intern? Social media content, right? If you need social media post, like you can hone that in, you can refine. Like there's just so many ways I think of like, hey, wherever you're sending content, help me refine this email. Help me, you still need to start with like, what is it that you're actually, like everything we talked about in terms of like cautions and parameters and those kinds of things. You have to have the specifics, but from there, I think it can be just a super valuable tool to leverage.
One of the things as a software company, AI is being hyped incessantly as a tool to build software, as to understand. And one of the things we've found to be so profoundly sort of surprising almost is how poor AI is at creativity. And it makes a ton of sense though. Somebody had done a study one time and looked at all of the essentially over different time periods in automobiles. And I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, but if you remove the trim and remove the color differences between automobiles of a certain class, like a sedan, and you looked at different time periods, you see sort of design continuity, or sort of like this general theme of the way automobiles look. Right. Like in the when I was a kid, there was like this certain like boxy look that started to move towards more a rounded look to certain like, pickup trucks. And then you have like, there's like this almost parity between a lot of design things. And so when it comes down to core creativity, AI is kind of that thing looking at what's all available already and saying, okay, here's some, thoughts using existing knowledge. Right. It's not creative. Yep. It doesn't create new things necessarily. I mean, they can be new, sort of like adaptations
Yes.
of what's known.
Variations.
Yeah.
The same thing. Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing too, is like, don't use AI to kind of like eliminate your curiosity and creativity and just be like, to be naturally curious. It can help with that, because now suddenly you can ask more questions and get more answers, and you can level up as a human.
Absolutely.
From it. But it doesn't make you less smart. It should make you smarter.
Yeah. That's good. It's good. Okay. So how do you get the most out of AI as we close?
Oh my goodness.
It's a big question. I know we talked about a lot of it.
Yeah.
But
well, and kind of a recap though.
Yeah.
I mean, being very specific is critical. Not this, you want to arrive at specifics. And so you can start with vague, narrow down to specific. And sometimes that just even helps you get
Process
to that,
it.
right? But you need specifics. Don't, we've talked about this already, but you don't want to just run with the first thing that you get spit back at you and say, well, that's close to right. Get it right.
Yeah. Doesn't take that much more effort to get it right.
Be inquisitive, interrogate it, assume it to be wrong might be another point.
That's good.
Where you're saying, and I think more people just need this, even just with memes on the internet. Assume it to be wrong, fact check it. I'm like, I heard, it's like, what?
Probably true.
Does that even make sense? I remember my grandfather telling me he was listening to the news in Chicago, and somebody, some newscaster had said, there are 5 cats and 3 dogs for every single person alive in the city of Chicago. And he's doing the math in his head and being like, okay, there's, 4 million people, 5 cats. Say, huh? And so I think just natural curiosity sometimes can just make us challenge assumptions. I had an AI prompt the other day, and I wanted a summary of some pretty basic math, but it was another AI model that, gave me a wrong result. But I'm thinking, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
So you have to assume almost things to be wrong, and also look for the breakdown. If you're something that looks wrong, say, hey, walk me through that. Break down the exact math and test it.
Yeah. That's
so
good.
I think that's another piece of it. And I think from a practical standpoint, this might be a tool that you think, I don't need it.
Yeah, I'm out.
It's not gonna work, and that's okay.
Yep.
But test it out.
Yep. Try it.
Right.
Give it a try.
Download.
Yeah. ChatGPT. They have a free version. You don't even have to pay for it.
You don't have to pay for it. Yeah. Try it out. And I think, why are we talking about it? To your point earlier, Kinsey, I think this can be something as an incredibly useful tool.
Yeah.
You have enough stress already. You have enough pressure on your shoulders. Absolutely. You have enough things to deep think. This can be something where it can kind of alleviate some of that pressure. Yeah. Taking documentation and putting it in different categories. If you feel overwhelmed by something where I got to go write a 10-page estimate and I just don't know where to start with all of the details for that, use this tool.
It's good. I love it.
Yeah.
Guys, I hope this helps. Oh,
hopefully, I'm sorry.
I was like, I thought we were done.
Yeah. Well, and I think hopefully this episode demystified some of the AI concept as well. Of like, it's just so critical to walk into it with the right perspective and then also the right results in mind. Of like, I'm going to use this to help me level up as a person. Doesn't replace me. Yep. It doesn't think for me.
Yeah, you're still the expert.
Yeah. And then when you're not an expert, you can use it as a research tool.
Yes.
It can be something that kind of guides you to better informed conversations as you get ready to talk to your lawyer. You said, I was looking at all of these different things. I mean, your lawyer is very similar to the ChatGPT in some respects. You're asking your lawyer a specific question, and the more specifics you give him, the better his answer is going to be.
That's so true.
So I think there is a lot to be gained from using a tool.
So good. Okay, guys, I hope this was helpful. Let us know if you're for AI or against AI in the comments.
Yeah.
If you tried it,
hacks as well,
and how it served your business. Yeah, that'd be great. Hacks. All right, we'll see you guys next time.